The secret things belong to God. Hey, welcome to The Whole Truth, where when you wear socks, it's harder to roll on a smooth floor. Okay, anyways, now you know that I'm just in sock feet. I don't have shoes on, but it's my house, so I can do what I want. Today we're talking about Deuteronomy chapter 29. The secret things belong to the Lord. And I'm going to let you in on a little secret. I actually forgot this chapter. I didn't mean to forget it. I just, in my exuberance getting through Deuteronomy, I've actually already filmed all the other videos to the end of the book, which is only one more that I still have to post, but I'd already filmed them. I filmed 5 videos. I shot 5 videos and then was looking on YouTube and went, oh my, I forgot Deuteronomy chapter 29. So the secret things belong to the Lord, but those things that are revealed belong to us, and that's now been revealed. So you now have a little secret into what I've done. I didn't mean to do it. It wasn't purposeful. I promise. I'm not trying to skip anything, at least not purposefully. It was just an excitement about, oh, we're almost done with Deuteronomy and I got to make a new intro for Joshua. And so anyways, here we are. It's Deuteronomy chapter 29 today, and I'll see if I can adjust. Hopefully I'm going to be able to adjust the playlist so that it will show up in order on the playlist, and hopefully it won't be out of order. But if it is, that's why you might see Deuteronomy 29 at the end and not in the middle, because it's when I shot it and when I got it uploaded onto YouTube. So anyways, there you go. Enough of that. We're in Deuteronomy chapter 29 today, where God is reestablishing the covenant with his people, Israel. We know that they're getting ready to go into the promised land. That's what this whole thing has been about. And why would God need to go over the covenant? Why would he need to make a covenant a second time? Do you remember what a covenant is? And why would God need to make that covenant a second time? And then some of the things that he says in here are hard for us to understand. It doesn't make sense. It's almost like when Jesus spoke and he's like, they're going to hear it, but they're not going to understand it. And why would God do that? Why would God let us see things and let us hear things, but then not open up our hearts to understand? And we're going to talk about all of that today. Let's read a little bit. We'll read a little and then talk a little, read a little and talk a little. Let's start off with Deuteronomy chapter 29. Pick up with me in verse 1. These are the words of the covenant which the Lord commanded Moses to make with the children of Israel in the land of Moab, besides the covenant which he made with them in Horeb. Now Moses called all Israel and said to them, you have seen all that the Lord did before your eyes in the land of Egypt to Pharaoh and to all his servants and to all his land, the great trials which your eyes have seen, the signs and those great wonders. And yet the Lord has not given you a heart to perceive and eyes to hear and ears to hear to this very day. Pause. All right, that's going to be our first stopping point. Let's just start off with that. We're seeing that God said in verse 1, that these are the words of the covenant which the Lord gave to Moses in Moab. I got my names mixed up for a second. Moab, instead of, besides the words of the covenant which he gave in Horeb. Let's start off with the why for a second. We're in Moab and not in Horeb. What are those two different places? Well, we're really talking about what we would know as Sinai. Okay, Mount Sinai, that was at Exodus. Israel was delivered from Egypt, and they went to Mount Sinai, and there at Mount Sinai, they received the law, and then there at Horeb, they made a covenant with the Lord. And then they got to the promised land, and this is all in the book of Exodus. They got to the Exodus, and then in the book of Leviticus, and then Numbers. Okay, so Numbers, they get to the edge of the promised land, but they refused to go in. They sent in 12 spies. 10 of the 12 came out and said, don't go in. There's giants in the land. There's so many people. Don't go there. And 2 million people agreed not to go in the land. They cried out against Moses. They cried out against God. They said, why did you bring us out here to die? And all of those things. We've already been over those in all of the other videos. And so that was the first covenant they made, was that they would obey the law, but then they didn't go into the promised land, so they had to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. And they weren't just wandering as in, okay, go wander for 40 years and take a time out, and your 40-year time out, then you get to go back into the promised land. No, God looked at them and said, you said that I brought you out here to die. You said that you can't go in the promised land. Fine, you can have that. I mean, I'm paraphrasing there. God didn't say fine, but in so many words, God said, I'll give you exactly what you said you were going to have. You're going to go die in the wilderness. They wandered for 40 years because that generation died off in the wilderness. And the generation that was 20 years old or younger, or those who'd been born after that event of not going into the promised land, that generation has now been raised up 40 years later. So some people here are 60 years old because they were 20 or under when all that happened. So these people, this generation is now 60 years and younger. The rest of the generation had died off in the wilderness, with the exceptions there in Deuteronomy. We still have Moses and Caleb and Joshua. Joshua is going to lead the people into the promised land. Caleb gets to go with him because he was a faithful of those 12. So those 3 men are the only ones that are older than 60 because everybody else had to have died off in the wilderness. And that is why now at Moab, they get near the promised land. Moab comes out and tries to fight against them. So they defeated Moab. The land of Moab has now been given to 2.5 tribes of Israel, which we'll read here in a minute. And standing in that land, they're now going to take the covenant, because this group of people wasn't an adult. They weren't adults when their parents had taken the covenant back at Horeb, and that generation had to die off. Does that make sense why they had to now do it again? A covenant, it literally means to cut. And that's what we're seeing here. It's to cut a covenant. And what you're doing in the Old Testament, what one was doing when they would take a covenant, when they would cut a covenant, an animal would be cut in half, usually down the spine, down the middle, lengthwise. That animal would be split into 2, wide enough for the persons in the party to walk between those animals. You saw this in a vision with Abraham. You saw God take a covenant with him in this way, to cut a covenant with him in this way, and that's what it would be. And what you're saying in that covenant, the motion that you're doing of walking between this animal is saying, if I don't obey this covenant, I am accepting that this should happen to me. This animal that's been split apart, this bloody covenant, that this is what should happen to me. And so what I'm saying to you there is, when someone in the Old Testament, in the ancient world, took a covenant, they understood that what they were saying is, I will obey this covenant, I will fulfill this, and if I don't, there is a heavy consequence to pay. It's similarly when you maybe go and take a mortgage or go and take a loan. If you've ever done that, you sign a contract. And when you sign that contract, what are you saying? You're saying, I'm going to take this benefit. I'm going to take this, in the case of a mortgage, I'm going to take enough money to purchase this home that I don't have enough money for. And I'm going to sign on the dotted line and say, I will pay you back with interest, and I will pay you every month on this date. And if I don't, the repercussions are you may end up taking my home. You may end up foreclosing on my home, and then potentially, repossessing and selling my home. I understand that that's the covenant that I'm taking. That's the contract that I'm making. That's what cutting a covenant was. And so here they are taking the covenant a second time. And Moses calls the people and says, you have seen all that the Lord did before your eyes. Did you notice that? You've seen all the Lord did before your eyes. Some of those people, do you have memories of when you were 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20? I do. I mean, I got married when I was 18 years old. I have big memories of 18. I remember at 19 years old buying my first home. It had a pool in the backyard. I thought it was the bee's knees. I had this, a house that we had purchased and had a backyard that had a gigantic pool in the backyard. It was great. And so I have memories from that time. Moses says, you remember. He's talking to these people. He says, you remember all, you saw all that the Lord had done. But pay attention. You saw what the Lord had done, the great trials which your eyes have seen. I'm in verse 3 there. And the signs and great wonders. And yet the Lord has not given you a heart to perceive, and eyes to see, and ears to hear, to this very day. Now, that might seem confusing to say, like, you've seen it, but the Lord hasn't given you eyes to see it. It's like you've seen it, but you haven't seen it. You ever heard somebody do something like that? You kind of say the same word, but you put an emphasis on it. It's kind of the same way. They've seen these things, but the Lord has not given them a heart to perceive it. Now, the question might be, well, why? Why would God do that? Why would God block their hearts? Well, notice it didn't say that God blocked their hearts. It said that God did not give them the heart to perceive or the eyes to see it. So it's different. It's not like God took their eyes that did see and said, oh, you can't see anymore. No, instead, what it is that God did not open their eyes that were already not seeing. So let me give you 3 reasons why they could not see. Number 1, the first reason I believe they could not see is because I believe they had hard hearts. Israel was a stiff-necked people, and they had hard hearts. They didn't want to see, so they didn't see. It's not like they were searching and God was keeping it from them. It's not like they're running around with metal detectors in the sand looking for the treasure and God is keeping them away from the treasure. No, it would be more like there's a metal detector in the corner, but I'll pass. That's a big desert. I'm not going to go looking for treasure. Like, do you see what I'm saying? The difference there? They had hard hearts. Number 2, I don't ever see where they asked God to see. There were some people who did see, some people who did recognize the importance of what was happening, and they did see certain things. Moses was an example of that. Joshua is an example of that. Caleb is an example of that. They couldn't see everything. They couldn't perceive everything, but they certainly could see. They could see what was going on, and they knew that there was importance here, and they knew that there needed to be a covenant and a following of God. They knew those things. They could perceive that. So it's not that no one could see, but the majority could not see, and I believe that part of that is because they didn't ask. The Lord says that if we ask, He'll answer, and He has proven that time and again, both in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, that if we ask, He will answer. So this is not God blocking them from seeing, but it's that they have hard hearts and they've never even asked to see. And then I'm going to give you the last reason that I think that they could not see. Well, it's because they thought they could. They thought that they could see. They looked, they saw these miracles, and their perception of that is they're God's chosen special people because they've done something so right. They've done their heritage or whatever. They've got misconceptions. They think that they see, but they don't. And truthfully, that's probably the biggest danger for you and I today, isn't it? Is that we think that we see. I'm always concerned about the thing that I don't know. You don't know what you don't know. And so I like to search the Lord and ask Him and say, Lord, search me, know my heart. Look, I'll pray that from the Psalm. I'll pray, Lord, search me, search my heart, know me. And if there's any iniquity in me, then show me the way of righteousness. And I try to pray that in all sincerity to say, Lord, I want to see. The problem is that sometimes we just get so stuck. We get so stuck in what we think that we see that we're not willing to listen. I had a guy that I knew, and this is several, by the way. So if you watch this and you're a friend of mine, you're like, he's talking about me. It's a growing trend right now for some people to believe that the earth is flat. And there's a buddy of mine who believes that the earth is flat. And he said, Justin, I just want to know how come when an airplane flies that they don't have to tip the nose of the plane to keep it on if we're on a ball, why wouldn't, if we're flying straight, shouldn't the plane have to tip its nose down to keep it, like, shouldn't we have to fly it at a certain degree of the nose tip down to keep it on the ball? And I said, I don't have the answer to that. I know that, I've seen some videos from Kent Hovind and, how low we are actually flying. We feel like we're flying really high, but, we're such a small speck on this earth, on this ball. So I think we're flying level to the earth, but I don't know the answer to why we don't tip the nose of the plane down. Anyways, I met a pilot, and the pilot, I said that to him. He said to me, I have seen the curvature of the earth. I have been high enough in a plane that you can literally see with my naked eye, I can see the earth is curved. And I said, well, one of the things that's been proposed is, why don't you have to tip the nose of the plane down? And he said to me, we do. He said, what do you think autopilot is for? He said, an autopilot, he said, if it's not an autopilot or if it is, he said, either way, at every so many intervals, that's, so much distance, he said, if you don't tip the nose of the plane down to keep it level, then you would actually, if you were flying level, if you started flying level and you left it there and you didn't adjust, then you would begin to notice I forgot what he called it, the part that reads your altitude. He said you'll watch it begin to climb because you'll actually climb in altitude if you try to fly level. I said, oh my, you've got to come talk to this guy that I know, this friend of mine who believes that the earth is flat, and tell him that. And so he did. He went and he told this guy, they met up, and he told this guy that this is, the plane does tip the nose down. And the guy looked at him and said, no, that's a scam to fool you pilots. That's to fool you pilots into thinking that you're doing something that you're not doing because the earth is flat. And the pilot said, I have been in a plane high enough that I've seen the curvature of the earth. I've seen it with my naked eye. And my friend looked at him and said to the pilot, he said, no, that's also a scam. They curve the glass on the plane. And the pilot said, well, how come then things don't look curved if I'm sitting on the ground? If I have the plane on the landing pad and I look out, the everything looks flat. But if I get up in a certain altitude, it looks curved. And the guy who believes the earth is flat said, do you know how much it costs to replace one of those windows? And he was like, yeah, it's like $2 million. And he was like, why do you think those windows are so expensive? This one friend of mine, now I'm not knocking him at all, but he is so convinced that the earth is flat that even when somebody is saying that these are these facts that I know, a pilot who's experienced them, and he has an answer for all of those. And my point to that, I hope you're hearing what I'm saying. Sometimes we have hard hearts and we think that we know something, and we think that we know it so much that we're not willing to hear. And sometimes we can do that with God himself, that we've hardened our hearts to what he's trying to tell us, to what he's revealing to us. And we keep saying no matter how great the evidence is that it's a yes, or maybe the other way around, or whatever. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, please don't come at me in this video for flat earth stuff. I only told you an example of a flat earther and a pilot that I know that I tried to put together to try to show that sometimes we think we know something and we're not willing to hear what someone else is telling us, or we're not willing to hear what the Lord is telling us. And that might exactly be the reason that they were not able to perceive. Let's go on with the rest of this text. Look what happens next. I'm now in verse 5. So now look, and I have led you 40 years in the wilderness. Your clothes have not worn out on you, and your sandals have not worn out on your feet. You've not eaten bread, nor have drunk wine or similar drink, that you may know that I am the Lord your God. And when you came to this place, Sihon king of Heshbon and Og king of Bashan came out against us to battle, and we conquered them. We took their land and gave it as an inheritance to the Reubenites, to the Gadites, and to half the tribe of Manasseh. Therefore, keep the words of this covenant and do them, that you may prosper in all that you do. So God now enumerates for them some of the miracles that they've seen. He said, you've seen these miracles, but you did not perceive them in your hearts. And then he goes to give them a few. He says, you've got sandals on your feet and they haven't worn out. 40 years. Y'all, that ain't natural. Clothes that are on your back, they have not worn out in 40 years. I want to point out the shoes one for a moment, because I actually love this point. In the tabernacle, I have a series on the tabernacle. You could go back and go watch that. The tabernacle, every element of the tabernacle pointed to Christ. Now, according to what we just read, those people in Israel, they would have a hard time seeing that. They wouldn't be able to see that all these things are pointing to Christ. They were putting up a tent to go and worship at the tent. But God is saying, no, in each and every one of these elements, I'm pointing you to the Savior. And I know that because that's what we read in the book of Hebrews that's later in the New Testament. God shows us what those typologies are. And one of those is the coverings that go on the tabernacle. There were 4 coverings, and I don't want to go over all 4 of those, but the outermost covering was porpoise skin, like the leather of a porpoise. Now, you might go, where in the world would you get porpoise skin? And the answer to that question is from Egypt. They used to live in Egypt. And what would ancient Egyptians use porpoise leather for? Shoes. And I want you to consider that in the book of Exodus, God had asked for an offering. He told Moses to ask all the people for an offering to build the tabernacle. And do you know what one of those things that they needed to offer was? Porpoise leather for the top of the tabernacle. They offered up the leather that they would use for shoes to cover the tabernacle. And 40 years later, God says, look, your shoes never wore out on your feet. God took care of them the whole time. He had provided for them the whole time. He had done miracle after miracle. Now read along with me and see what we read next, though. I'm in verse 10. All of you stand today before the Lord your God, your leaders and your tribes and your elders and your officers, all the men of Israel, your little ones and your wives, also the stranger who is in your camp, from who cuts your wood to the one who draws your water, that you may enter into covenant with the Lord your God and into his oath, which the Lord your God makes with you today, that he may establish you today as a people for himself, and that he may be God to you, just as he has spoken to you, and just as he has sworn to your fathers, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. God says, I have brought you this far and all who are with you to bring you into this covenant. What's the covenant? To cut a covenant, to say, to sign, to say, I will do this. I will follow you, and understand that if I don't, there's a severe consequence for that. But I want the blessing of following you, so I'm going to make this covenant with you. Now on to verse 20. Verse 14. I make this covenant and this oath not with you alone, but with him who stands here today, with us today before the Lord your God, as well as him who is not here with us today. For you know that he dwelt in the land of Egypt, and that we came through the nations which you passed by, and you saw their abominations and their idols, which are among them, wood and stone and silver and gold, so that there may not be among you a man or a woman or family or tribe whose heart turns away today from the Lord our God to go and serve the gods of these nations, and that there may not be among you a root bearing bitterness or wormwood, and so it may not happen when he hears the words of this curse that he blesses himself in his heart, saying, I shall have peace, even though I follow the dictates of my heart, as though the drunkard could be included with the sober. I could preach that. I could make a whole sermon out of that right there. Do you understand what God just said? God said, you have been through all these other nations, you have seen their abominations, you've seen their idols, and I want to keep you from those. So I'm making this covenant with you so that you understand. You're signing on the line. We're cutting a covenant. The animal has been divided. We're walking through the middle to say, if you don't keep your end of this covenant, then the same thing should happen to you. It's a heavy price for not keeping the covenant. And God says, I'm making this covenant because I don't want you to follow the dictates of your heart and then say, I'm at peace. All is good. In other words, think of it like this. A man from Israel he's tempted to follow other gods, to make sacrifices to other gods, to follow other idols, to worship other gods. He's tempted to do that. His heart wants to do that. So if his heart wants to do it, then he goes and does it. And then he goes, well, I'm good. I'm fine. Maybe he comes up with a reason for that. I'm just doing what feels good. I wasn't there when my parents made that covenant with the Lord, so it really doesn't matter to me. God said, no, it's for the person who's here and the person who's not here. Because I don't want you to do those things and then say in your heart, I'm at peace. You're not at peace. It's an illusion. It's like a drunkard hanging out with sober people. He might have the illusion he's okay. But if you gave him a sobriety test, he can't walk the line. Why can't he walk the line? Because he's drunk. Now have you ever been around a drunk person who thinks they're good, but they're not? Like that's what he's referencing. This guy thinks that he's good, but he's not good. God says, I'm making this covenant because I want you to know the curse. I want you to understand if you break my law and you go chase after other gods, you're not good. You might think that you're good, but you're not good because you're not living in the covenant with me. And now look what he says. We'll pick up now we actually are in verse 20. So the Lord would not spare him, for then the anger of the Lord and his jealousy would burn against that man, and every curse that is written in this book would settle on him. And the Lord would blot out his name from under heaven, and the Lord would separate him from all the tribes of Israel for adversity, according to all the curse of the covenant all the curses of the covenant that are written in this book of the law. so that the coming generation of your children who rise up after you and the foreigner who comes from a far land would say, when they see the plagues that of that land and the sickness which the Lord had laid on it, the whole land is brimstone, salt, and burning. It is not sown, nor does it bear, nor does any grass grow there, like the overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah and Zeboim, which the Lord overthrew in his anger and his wrath. All nations would say, why has the Lord done so to this land? What does the heat of this great anger mean? Then the people would say, because they have forsaken the covenant of the Lord God of their fathers, which they made with him when he brought them out of the land of Egypt. For they went and served other gods and worshipped them, gods that they did not know and that had not given to them. And then the anger of the Lord was aroused against this land to bring on it every curse that is written in this book, that the Lord uprooted them from their land in anger, in wrath, and in great indignation, and cast them into another land as it is this day. The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but those things which are revealed belong to us, to our children forever, that we may do all the words of this law. Did you understand that? If you break the law, you follow other gods, God said he's going to devastate the land. He will devastate the land. He'll make it so that nothing grows there, nothing's planted there. It's a desert land. And the people are around, other nations are going to say, why? Why would God do this to the land? And then the people can say, because they did not follow his covenant. They did not do what he had told them to do. It's a great consequence. It's a cut of the covenant. Separated into two pieces to say, I will follow this or I will suffer the great consequence and the great loss. If I sign on the dotted line for my mortgage and say, I will pay this, but then I don't pay, it'll be a great loss because I would lose my home. I wouldn't have my home anymore. That would be a great loss. Well, in a greater way, God made a covenant with them and as a nation and said, if you follow after other gods, I will take you away. I just started yesterday in church. I just started the book of Daniel. And do you know where the book of Daniel is? Babylon, where it starts. Babylon, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, besieged Jerusalem and besieged Judah and took them into captivity. And now all of Israel, and now in the book of Daniel, now all of Judah included. If that confused you by saying all of Israel and all of Judah, it would be like saying Kentucky and the United States. Okay, all of Kentucky and all of the United States. Not that big, but you get the idea. All of Judah, smaller, and all of Israel, those are kind of all the 12 tribes of Israel, all of them have now been taken captive. In the book of Daniel, every one of them had been taken captive. They had all been dispersed out of their land. And do you know why they'd been dispersed out of their land? Because the kings were wicked and the nation was serving other gods, and God did exactly what he said he would do right here. And then that means something for you and I then, doesn't it? God is going to punish sin. That's the truth of it. You see, here's the thing. The secret things belong to God. You might say, why did God choose Israel? I've had people ask me this question. Why did God choose Israel and not someone else? There were millions of people on the earth, and God chose Abraham and chose to bring the Israelite people. There were all these different people, all these different tribes. Why did God choose Israel knowing that they would rebel? Well, that's the secret things that belong to the Lord. I can't give you the why. I can't tell you why God did that, but I can tell you that he did choose Israel. The things that are revealed, those are for us. He did choose Israel. And I can tell you the covenant that he gave with Israel because that's revealed. So that's for us. I can understand that. And I can understand that through his word, what God has said is that he is going to punish sin. And I can also understand what is revealed in his son. Because God punished sin for us on his son who hung on the cross. Jesus died in our place. He paid the covenant price for our rebellion. And so now today, we can enter into the new covenant. Do you know what Jesus said was the blood of the new covenant? Do you remember this? He takes the wine that night and he says, this is the blood of the new covenant. Wait, what covenant? to cut a covenant, separate the animals, and to say, this should happen to me if I break the covenant. There's a blood of the new covenant, and it's Christ, and it's his blood. And he shed his blood for me. He died for me. He suffered for me. And so in my place where I have said in a covenant, this should happen to me. That's what a covenant is. Christ took that on himself. He took the punishment of the covenant on himself. And if you put your faith in him and you believe in him and you'll follow him, then there is no more punishment. Because the wrath of God, this wrath that would make the land barren, has been poured out on his son. And now you and I walk in the new covenant with Christ, saved, redeemed. Isn't that an interesting word? Redeemed, a purchase. If I have a coupon, I go to the store and I've redeemed the coupon, or I've redeemed the gift card. It's a purchase. I've been redeemed. You've been redeemed. How? Because the purchase price of the covenant signed on the dotted line, the purchase price of the covenant has been paid in the person of Christ. Do you have your faith in Christ? Do you believe in him who paid the covenant price for your sins? I sure hope that you have. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I hope that I'll see you tomorrow. For you, tomorrow is going to be Deuteronomy chapter 30. But for me, tomorrow is I begin to shoot for Joshua. I look so forward to it. I'll see you then.